Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Florence Dumouriez. I'm the VP of Marketing Communications for the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. I want to welcome you back to day 2 of ECI's Leading Edge series, Applying Enterprise Risk Management to ESG-related risks. Our next session is a discussion of the message, information, communications, and reporting of ESG-related risks. We have Volt Platform. We have Holly Bossert here. She is the Vice President of Sales for Volt, as well as Lisa Shore-Babin. She's the founder and principal of Shore Ethics Consulting. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you so much. Great. Welcome. So we'll kick right off. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm Holly Bossert. I'm VP of Sales at Volt Platform. And with me, I have Lisa Shore-Babin, who is founder of Shore Ethics Consulting. And Lisa works with clients to deliver on key strategic initiatives, including ESG assessments and reports, workplace respect training, thought leadership on compliance, ethics topics, and conducting workplace investigations. So happy to have her with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So global events and disasters of recent years have moved ESG to the forefront with a broad range of stakeholders demanding action, regulators focused on board diversity, and companies responding with expanding programs in support of speak-up cultures, social justice, inclusion, and human rights. Leaders and employees are being asked to step forward to help drive change, and businesses are being challenged to make a difference with their ESG program. So this isn't always easy, and being able to find the answers and implement practical steps can sometimes prove challenging. So today what we'll discuss is how organizations can leverage their information and technology systems to reduce risk, and think about how communication channels assist with reducing that risk. We will also discuss best practices on reporting and driving a culture of trust and transparency. So Lisa's going to give us a view from what's happening from the employer's perspective, and we're going to do this via a fireside chat, so no slides to have to follow along with. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into a poll, which I believe will come up on the screen. Oh, there it is, perfect. So Edelman's survey of 600 investors between September and October 2020 found that a percentage of investment firms stated that they will not invest in companies with a lack of sufficient information or data on their ESG performance. So what was the percentage? 42, 62, or 82%? Give everybody a minute. Alyssa, can you see the poll? The responses?
I can. Yeah, you can see the answers.
Oh, I can't see the answers. So Lisa, that would be fantastic if you can summarize.
Yeah, right now we've got about, of the 82 respondents, we've got about 33 saying 60%, 62%. We've got 11 saying 82% and 9 at 42%. So the majority are still going for the 62%.
Okay, fantastic. Give everybody another second or two, and then we'll reveal the answer. Lisa, how's it looking now?
We're still about the same.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. So the answer is actually 82%. So 82% of investment firms will not invest in companies with a lack of sufficient information or data on their ESG performance. So with that in mind, we can think about how do we actually build an ESG program and report on that performance. So Lisa, I'm going to start with you. There's a strong argument that says a first step in building an ESG plan is to listen to your employees. Lisa, firstly, would you agree with that? And if so, why?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, Holly. A company's employees can be real strong advocates for ESG and good corporate citizenship. I think they go hand in hand, which includes speaking out when they see something's wrong. Companies typically deputize the legal team, the internal audit team, maybe the ERM teams, depending on the organization, to conduct risk assessments. And we've heard from some of the speakers before, they really laid the ground very well for this discussion around that. They often take a top-down approach by starting with the board and with senior management, sort of getting their assessment of what the greatest risks are in the company. And they may conduct employee focus groups or administer employee surveys to supplement kind of the view of risk from the top of the company. And all of these are important, and they provide very important insight into the company's risks. But the insight derived from employee reporting in particular provides company leaders with a really unique window into the day-to-day operations and workings of the company. And they potentially provide early visibility into some of the company's biggest risks. The employees are on the ground. They see what's happening. They are an excellent early warning system, often the first ones to observe and grasp not only the risk itself, but the weight of a threat to the business. When an employee witnesses or experiences misconduct and reports it, the company has an opportunity to see what the employees see and to listen and understand what's happening within the organization and conduct a thorough and fair review. So it's not enough just to listen, but they also need to do that thorough and fair review. By doing a root cause analysis of what happened, and most importantly, why, organizations can address the issues and fix the broken or the missing controls before the issues become bigger ones, or even worse than that, before the employee decides, you know what, I've had enough, and they go to the outside authorities, they go to the media, or they hire a lawyer, or some combination of those. Employees can use different channels to speak up, but companies have to have a pulse on all of them and to be looking out for those red flags, starting with the hotline reporting, but other things like company internal blogs, chat rooms, even the code of conduct certifications often is an opportunity for employees to express what's of concern to them or what they may have seen before they're able to certify. Employee survey responses, and very importantly, are exit interviews where they've got one foot out the door, and that's an opportunity to hear what they experienced when they were at the company. The organization has to want to build the right culture. The right culture, I mean, what does that mean? It could mean different things for different companies, but among many of the things, it means that the culture encourages diversity of thought. It empowers employees to have a voice within the organization, and that it's willing and able to listen to its employees. It means having a strong culture means having the right and providing the right tools for employees to be able to speak out and do it safely and confidentially and without fear of retaliation. It means supporting the employees to use those tools. So again, it's not enough to have the tools. You also have to support the employees in use of those tools and give them that safety and comfort that they can speak out confidentially and without fear of retaliation. When there's a complete failure of culture, and this was mentioned elsewhere, like in cases of Volkswagen and Theranos, where neither of those companies provided the employees with a safe environment to share concerns, and nor do they hold management or the board accountable to do what's right for the employees, for the customers, for the stakeholders, for the environment, really. And those stories will eventually go public, as they did with Volkswagen and Theranos. And imagine, though, if in either of those companies, the employees had the space and the tools to voice concerns about what they were seeing, and management had been willing and equipped to listen to them, to those employees. Both of these companies might have had a fighting chance to right the wrong before it was too late, to course correct, and to tell the ESG story in their own words. We know what happened to Theranos, but in the case of Volkswagen, they're so far behind the 8 ball, and until they get to a point where they can tell their own ESG story, it will be a long way coming. All companies are going to eventually have to embark on their ESG journey if they haven't already done so. So companies should continue to build a culture of trust, transparency, integrity through implementing a Speak Up program that where employees are encouraged to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation, and that their voices are counted among those voices and opinions that are reflected in the company's ESG story. So hopefully that answers your question.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay, we will dive into the next question. So I have a question for you, Holly. We're told that organizations should leverage existing communication channels in order to provide timely, relevant, and quality ESG-related information. What are your thoughts on this, Holly?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's some internal communication channels that really do provide the best source of information to really understand what is happening within your business related to that ESG information. Interestingly, at Vault, we recently conducted an independent survey called the Trust Gap. And what we did was we interviewed 2,000 employees across about 500 companies to understand expectations of employees versus the reality, and how employees and employers can essentially bridge that gap and open up lines of communication specifically related to misconduct. And as you said, the ability to provide that open and honest communication is fostering a culture of that trust and feedback. So which is why we called our research report the Trust Gap, because there's a gap between that trust and that feedback and that transparency very often between organizations and those employees that work there. So we need to be able to bridge that gap between the employee and the organization. And interestingly, from our data that we collected, we learned that 85% of US office workers believe that businesses should find secure ways to collect and leverage misconduct data to support long-term strategies. And 82% of US employees believe that internal whistleblowing is vital to ensuring that people are protected from the negative impacts of workplace misconduct. So at the end of the day, employees want to be heard and to share misconduct information, but even more importantly, they want to work for an ethical company. And many employees will do their best to essentially fix what is wrong first. And providing that psychologically safe space to report and have the company respond is the first line of fixing a problem with your ESG program. And interestingly enough, according to the SEC, an employee will have reported internally 5 to 6 times before they actually go external.
Yeah, that is a staggering number. I'd like to add, though, also that there are lots of other communication channels that can be leveraged to gather good information on ESG-related topics that goes hand in hand with employee reporting, and that could include applications for workplace awards like the World's Most Ethical Award, where you're gathering lots of information about what's going on in the company, kind of the state of your ESG program, the state of where you are measured against your goals, and a lot of that is very good and helpful information, as well as certifications like ISO certifications and others. Also, diversity, equity, and inclusion committee meeting minutes is another avenue for getting good information. It's another place where people are, employees are raising concern, where committees are having discussions about company risks, and even customer feedback. So, really any place where in the company where you can be listening into the sentiments of your stakeholders is very helpful and very important for the ESG program.
It's a great point. And ultimately, all of those do impact the bottom line of the business.
Absolutely.
So, Lisa, I have another question for you. As a global compliance and ethics leader for 17 years in a large enterprise business, what communication channels do you think supported your organization in building a substantive ESG program and managing ESG-related risk?
So thanks for that question, Holly. I would start with the enterprise risk management structure. And the session prior to this one did a really wonderful job in laying out that structure and how it ties so well into, how ERM and ESG tie so well into each other. But I would say that that's kind of the first thing that naturally addresses the enterprise level risks that include, of course, ESG risks. That involves, having quarterly risk management discussions with risk owners. Sometimes the risk owners are the executives of the company. Sometimes there are other leaders across the company, as well as presentations and alignment with the board. So that's one great part, kind of ongoing structure, ongoing program that raises up risks throughout the company, hopefully on a global basis, across the company and as deep as possible, where risks are identified. Then there's the corporate social responsibility program, which may be a predecessor to ESG. In some companies, maybe those are two things handled somewhat separately. But that at least has in the past, generated an annual CSR report that's grounded in the company's purpose, and focused on its stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, shareholders, the community, government, regulators. And it's another great way to communicate the message and the risks and the opportunities to stakeholders. And next is, and this is not necessarily in order of priority, but I'm sort of thinking from top down, tone from the top, where the leaders are modeling the right behaviors, and that's reinforced through our regular communications from senior leadership, through town halls, through individual leader communications to their team, their employees on their teams, leveraging the communications team to launch training sessions and supporting messaging around compliance and ESG. Again, tone at the top is where that tone gets set for the rest of the organization. The company's mission, value, vision, and values, those are all grounded in the principles of doing the right thing, or should be, and having a positive impact, and are continuously reinforced in all of the corporate and company communications. So that's another place where ESG has a place to be communicated throughout the company. The code of conduct, again, is a linchpin of all of the culture and all of the policies and other policies that support the company's mission and values, including the ESG program, and that are supplemented by additional guiding principles and procedures and policies around sustainability, around diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-corruption and human trafficking, political contributions, and lots of other compliance, ethics, and ESG-related topics. And then training. So code of conduct and other kinds of training, whether they're virtual or in person or some combination thereof, that provides, and this is really important, that provides additional guidance for managers to support the speak up culture, because it's not, you could have all the great tools and employees could understand how to use them, but you've got to have the managers trained. So when the employees come to them, they know how to handle the concerns. They know what to say, how to say it. They know the timing of it. They know how to escalate and where to escalate. And that's really, really crucial, because we all know that the employee's first stop is their manager. And so that those managers need to be trained on supporting the speak up culture. And then a communication and awareness plan that educates the employees on how to report concerns, to continuously reinforce the message of the importance of speaking up. And, while people may know generally how to speak up, you have to make sure that they understand where to go for that information, how to do it confidentially, how to do it anonymously if they need it, and all the kind of the supporting structures around it. Then, another avenue is a robust community engagement and volunteer program that's, again, grounded in the company's purpose and demonstrates the company's commitment to giving back and to having an impact on the world and the communities in which they operate. And then finally, a feedback loop. You want to get a pulse from the employees, not just through their reporting where they're voluntarily reporting, but also get a pulse from, the impression they have of the company's commitment to ethics and integrity, including the awareness and comfort level with using the speak up tools. And that's particularly important with new employees who are coming into the organization, who don't have the history, as well as current employees, because your speak up tools may have changed. They may have come from a place, or they may be in a geography where it doesn't come as naturally. So there's a lot of continuous work that needs to be done in raising awareness around speaking up. And there are more, of course, but these are kind of the primary communication channels from my experience.
Thank you so much. That's some great information.
All right. If we, we'll wait for the questions to the end. I just want to make sure that we're not kind of speeding through this. If anybody has any questions, of course, feel free to speak up. So I have a question for you, Holly. Like we mentioned in the poll today, ESG reporting is being reviewed by many institutions and private investors to inform investment decisions. And misleading or inaccurate statements in the ESG reporting could expose a company to risk, including litigation risk. What should companies do to ensure that this does not happen?
It's a good question. And I think it builds on a lot of what you've already discussed, but I like to think about this in steps. So step one is essentially record and track, right? You need to put controls in place that can be used to record and track performance. And it's beyond the engagement survey anymore. You should have one of those in place too, but it goes beyond that. So 15, 20 years ago, the engagement survey was okay and it could stand alone, but it just doesn't cut it now. In addition to the engagement survey, the world's most ethical organizations provide a true platform to track ESG reporting. Emails, I've worked with organizations that have said, we have a suggestion box where people put their concerns, or, I told my manager, those tend to go down the proverbial rabbit hole. And that's where statements become inaccurate. We've all played that game of telephone as a child, and we know how that ends up, right? So it's really around recording and track. Step two, to build on that recording and track, is collect real-time data. If you're only asking a few times a year, you aren't asking enough. So if we think about it this way, if you ask how the company is doing ethically in, say, like January, and then don't ask again for 6 to 9 months, a lot happens in between, especially if you are a large organization, right? Or if you're growing and scaling. Then really what you've done is you've created an environment that's right for ESG concerns. Because employees don't have a real-time place to go to provide feedback or concerns. And then you can't get ahead of problems that might be coming up. So step three then is, we've collected real-time data, we've provided a place to do so, is review that data and information. You can't act if you don't know, right? So this is the first thing that prevents employees from providing feedback and feeling secure in their feedback. So as a side note from my experience, it's important to review your engagement survey items that ask something like, if there was an ethics violation at my company, I trust leadership to act on that infraction. If your employees are responding with a low response, say like a 2 on a 5-point scale or a 4 or 5 on a 10-point scale, that means you've built a culture of not responding, and that trust gap starts to widen. So once you've reviewed the data and the information, step 4 is to act. And that's the true thing that's worse than not reviewing the data and information, is not taking action based on the data collected. And this all goes back to that trust and transparency. Make it a company value and live it. The most ethical companies that I've worked for and with, who have the best ESG programs, have fostered a true transparent culture around the data that they've collected and that communication and then act back to those employees. They've acknowledged problems, they've provided trainings, follow-ups, coachings, more data gathering, whatever it is, they've communicated it back to the employees around what they're doing and what that action is, and they own it. Employees want to hear, we've heard you, and now this is what we're going to do. And finally, building upon all of those 4 steps is continue that communication, and not just with the employees around what you're doing, but make sure you are communicating with internal teams as well. Include facilities and operations, legal and compliance, obviously HR, government relations, anyone that helps manage that ESG data, to make them aware of the importance of accurate reporting, providing training, communication, creating effective controls and frameworks that can help you do better. It's a good question.
Great, thank you. And I've kind of just reiterated with the administrators, if anybody has any questions on any particular response or question or response, let us know so we don't have to wait to the end. We can certainly stop and address questions.
I think there's one, I see one from Lilia Fisher. Her question is, if the number of ethics line cases reported is low, what does that indicate? So there's a couple of things that essentially indicates. One, it could be the manner in which you're gathering that data. So we know that only 6% of ethics concerns are reported via like the traditional old-fashioned hotline, right? Where they actually have to pick up a phone. So that's very ineffective for a lot of employees today. So that's one of the things that can impact the low number of cases being reported. The other reasons go back to that trust, that communication that the organization hasn't built with the employees yet, and that transparency. And then employees start to wonder, if I report this, what happens, right? Like, is there going to be retaliation? Am I going to lose my job? Is this going to be an issue for me on a daily basis? So it goes back to, how are you gathering that data? Is there a psychologically safe space for them to do so, that they can easily do, or do it anonymously? The hotline, as much as people like to say it's anonymous, you call and the first thing you hear is, this is being recorded for training purposes. So now all of a sudden you are not anonymous. And it also doesn't allow you to think through the process. Once you've picked up that phone, you're in the reporting process, right? So that's another reason why employees tend not to use that. So think about building that trust, that transparency, that communication, and then how are you gathering the data? Are you providing them with multiple means that are safe, that they can report anonymously, or come even forward together if there's a large group that witnesses a ethics violation? It's a great question.
I'd actually also like to add to that. There's also, I think, a distrust by employees at times if they don't see that there are any actions taken when they do report. So the more you can demonstrate, and it's sort of an iterative process, but the more you can demonstrate that their concerns have been listened to, have been received and listened to and acknowledged, and that actions are being taken. Now, you may not report back on what actions are taken, but it's important that they see that actions are taken. And that's sort of something that gets around. So once people.
Well, Lisa, I think you're muted all of a sudden.
I don't know why that happened. That's strange. And so the more you can demonstrate and the more the word gets out that a person reported and their concerns were addressed, even if they weren't happy with the ultimate results, but what were addressed and taken seriously, that is something that starts to build the trust. And then one other thing is, there are differences, geographic differences in employees' comfort levels. So in one geography, you have to look at the numbers. Are they low across the board, or are they low in certain geographies? There may be places, and there's some sentiment that maybe in some of the Asian countries, there's less of a comfort level in reporting. In some of the other countries, there may be a better comfort. So, you have to do things, more communication and more training and more just more awareness in some of those areas where the comfort level is still not there. So, you have to look at the numbers and really understand what the numbers are saying as well.
That's a great point. Actually leads me into a following question. So in your experience, what role do ethics and compliance professionals play in collecting, recording, and reporting that ESG data?
So from my experience, the compliance and ethics professionals focus on overseeing compliance risk, right? Risk management. But in some cases, the compliance team, and in my case, when I worked in-house, was the compliance team actually helped oversee the entire enterprise risk management program that covered all of the enterprise level risks, including ESG risk and data. And that includes setting the company's risk appetite and tolerance, identifying the risk, assessing them, putting together action plans to mitigate the risk, and monitoring progress. And of course, helping to develop the metrics around how you want to start measuring your progress against those goals. Very importantly is collaborating with other teams. From my experience, the greatest collaboration came with the internal audit team, with the HR team, the employee relations teams, finance, facilities, because facilities really oversees all of the operation, a lot of the operational data. So in the sustainability space, that's a great area to be kind of leveraging the data. And so you're leveraging data from not only from the compliance team and from the enterprise level, the enterprise risk management process, but also these other teams sit on lots of data. There are audits, there are reviews done, there's operational data and facilities data, there's personnel data, among other things. So again, collaboration is really key to really tap into all that's available that's going to help the ESG program. Where gaps exist, the compliance and ethics professionals help create policies and procedures or update the existing policies and procedures to make sure that they're reflective of how the company is actually operating, how you want to be operating, and provides the right procedures, the right level of procedures to be able to be successful in implementing the policies. Overseeing the compliance communications and awareness initiatives, encouraging leaders across the company to communicate the risks and the opportunities within their teams. The more you raise awareness around risk and opportunity, the more collaboration you're gonna get, and the more you're gonna create a better risk culture where there's lots of awareness and understanding of why it's so important. Managing, and of course the compliance and ethics team manages typically the Speak Up program and conducting misconduct investigations, conducting root cause analyses, identifying trends around the company, and managing and centralizing the data in most effectively in one centralized place. So you can really look across the organization. Like I said, HR may have some data in its systems. The internal audit team stores its information somewhere else. And it's having sort of oversight over the data that resides in different systems and even in a centralized system with the Speak Up program is very important. And then reporting that information and those trends up to senior management and to the board, because they want to hear, and it's typically the compliance team that does that. They want to hear what's going on. They want to hear the trends and see the trends of employee reporting, but also what's behind those trends. So sometimes, we have the compliance team has the ability to say there are allegations of this kind in one area, but they're actually similar type of allegations in a completely different part of the company. And being able to connect the dots is very important, both for the compliance team, but also for senior management and the board. And then, again, just kind of reinforcing the importance of fostering a culture of compliance and driving cross collaboration around the company on the ESG related topics and really all of the risk topics that we've discussed.
Fantastic. There are a couple additional questions coming in.
Great.
The nature of speak ups and recommended actions leading out of them can be very sensitive to share with the reporters or employees. Can you give examples of the data leading out of these speak ups that employers can share with employees? I think it really goes to not necessarily sharing, like, we have a sexual harassment problem in engineering, right? It more along the lines goes to, we've asked you for information, so that communication back to the employees are, we've heard you, we have uncovered some areas of concern and we are acting on it. So you can't be specific, right, about a lot of it to that point. But it goes to, how do you phrase that and let them know that you are working on that communication? And that can also go to, we're rolling out a training for unconscious bias, right? Or we've seen some other areas where we need to provide information back to managers. And so that goes to, we've understood, we've heard you, we can see that there's a problem, and we are communicating it back to you. There are also some platforms that allow you to communicate back to a reporter anonymously what is happening with anything that they've reported with their incident. So I would encourage you to look into some of those platforms where that allows you that two-way communication, where the person who is investigating doesn't know if the person has submitted their report anonymously, they don't know who they're speaking to. So there's that anonymous two-way communication. Lisa, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I would add. So one thing that I had done in the past was, I completely agree with you when you're dealing with responding to an individual, there's a limit to what you can respond. Most importantly is giving them the comfort that their concerns are being addressed and taken seriously. But sort of more in a macro level, sometimes you don't want to target, you don't want to call out a particular team or a particular problem, but one thing we had done was, in order to sort of reinforce a particular topic where there might be some issues, let's say, just as an example, conflict of interest, we would roll out or relaunch, let's say, the conflict of interest policy to a particular team or to the whole company or to a particular geography, sort of in a way that's not targeted so that an individual team or individual team member doesn't think it's about them, but also is an opportunity to reinforce what may be a topic that that team is struggling with. And so that's one way of dealing with sharing the gap that we found without being incriminating, really. And the other way is in training sessions. We did this quite a bit in live interactive training with teams. We did what was called "What Would You Do" training, and we would bring in scenarios from actual occurrences, actual reports that came in. Of course, it was anonymized. We would change some of the information, like the team, the geography, maybe some of the circumstances, but it's meant to be demonstrative of a particular problem that was a real problem that was really raised and was really addressed. And you go through a scenario, and then the team members in the room have an opportunity to hear and say, what would they have done differently, or spot the problem, and then talk about what would they do differently. And it's an opportunity to role play, but also, and we say up front, this is a thing that actually happened in this company. Of course, names and all that anonymized, but so they know it's real and they know it's serious, but it gives them an opportunity to use that muscle to say, if I were to be in that situation myself, what would I do differently? So those are some examples, some ideas.
I love that. And I actually met with an old colleague last night, and we were talking about how do you provide information back to employees like that. And she does that at her organization. She said it even helps when people say, we don't have a problem here, for them to see, actually, this is really what has happened in other parts of this organization. So we do have some concerns that we need to address. So it goes to, that's a great point. It goes to transparency for the employees, but it can also go to transparency for leadership that may not really understand that there might not be an issue they believe within their work unit, but within other areas of the organization. So we need to make sure that we're providing that training.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, I think this one is probably a good one for you. How can an organization leverage its information and technology systems to support enterprise risk management?
Well, I mean, I think we talked about that at the beginning. Clearly, if you're taking it from the bottom of listening to the employees, you're going to leverage your call it hotline, but whatever case management system sits behind the reporting mechanism. So typically you've got a case management system where you're housing all the data that's coming in through the employee reports. It also includes what actions were taken, what was found, how it was, whether it was substantiated or not, and what actions were taken, and what root cause analysis was done. So that's one technology tool that can be leveraged for risks. To be honest, there are lots of tools out there to manage enterprise level risk management programs. But it depends on the company's sort of sophistication level and as to whether they've adopted those technologies. Where I came from, we were still using spreadsheets, but it was actually quite effective in you use spreadsheets. You've got a bunch of formulas embedded in the spreadsheets, and you gather up information from all parts of the company, and you're able to aggregate and assess and manage those risks that way. But again, if you're collaborating with other teams, the internal audit team will probably have their own controls assessment tool. The HR team may have some kind of system like Workday or ADP or whatever system that they use, their HIRS system. In an ideal world, all these things would be connected. The finance team may have a Concur system or some system where they're managing expenses. And that's a great place to look for where risks might reside in the company in terms of how employees are spending money. That's a place where we spend quite a bit of time looking with the finance team to see where there are discrepancies in what's getting reported and how people are spending the money and with whom. That's where kind of you see gifts and entertainment getting abused, or even bribes and bribery through that system. So those are places you've got to have mechanisms where you're collaborating with those teams, and to the extent possible where you can integrate some of the systems so that they're all sitting in the same place. But that is really case by case basis, and it depends on the sophistication of the programs.
Great answer. Do we have time? I think we have time for one more. Let me look. So another question that has come in is, how would you recommend keeping track of all the issues reported outside of the ethics hotline? So if I'm reading this correctly, these are issues that are coming in that are not reported via the hotline. So via maybe a email or face-to-face. Right. Should most serious issues be logged into a system of tracking or a master spreadsheet by compliance?
Well, in my experience, actually, we use the case management system that sat behind the hotline for that very purpose. So we called it direct entry. And I mean, Holly, you mentioned on average 6% of reports are done through the actual phone line. And then there's, depending on what system you're using, there's a web version of the hotline. There's, of course, apps, which are probably going to be, the trend of the future. There may be even SMS or other kind of things like that. All of that, and then there's email. There's, they're coming through email. They're going to their direct manager. They're going to HR. Ultimately, the process should be that those issues are all coming back to the compliance team, and all of those should be entered in directly into the case management system. That would distinguish between what came in through the hotline automatically, or the web or the app, and what got entered in manually. But all of that should be part of the aggregate picture, because it's all. The point is to make it easiest and comfortable and safe and secure and confidential and anonymous if needed for employees to feel comfortable regardless of how they report it. And it should all be in that one place. So then you could do your analysis, you could do your root cause analysis, you could look across the company, you can, do your metrics on percentages and then report up effectively.
Yeah, there has to be ultimately a record of truth, right? That you can go to and pull on and run those additional analysis and take a look at that data and what's trending and how do you get ahead of some of those concerns. Additional questions? Does anybody have additional questions? I'll go back through and see if I missed any. Feel free to send them.
We have a little bit of time. We have another 15 minutes and we've luckily had the chance to take some questions. So why don't I ask you one more question, Holly?
Sure.
Okay. What should ethics and compliance teams think about when helping to develop an ESG strategy and define ESG metrics?
It's a good question. And I think this really rolls up to pretty much everything that we've said at this point, right? So it's almost a good summary. So is the ESG program tied to the company's strategy, right? Like, is the mission, the vision, the values, to your point earlier, making sure that we are driving and tied to that ESG program? They can't be two separate things, right? They have to work together. And then, I'm in sales, so I always say, measure the metrics that matter, right? So what metrics and what data are you gathering that can help tell your company's ESG story? So make sure you're not measuring just to measure, right? They have to matter. There has to be an outcome, and it has to build that story as you go forward. Do you have short-term and long-term goals? It's just like any other strategic program that you're building, right? Set those short-term goals that you can show that you are making impact and that you are moving forward, and you can communicate that back to the organization and to the employees, and then set those long-term goals as well. And make sure that they're, again, back to those metrics that matter, you can measure how you progress, and then you can communicate that back. And then how you access that data that measures progress is super important. And that needs to include what are the company's greatest risks, right? Is there unethical or improper employment practices? Are we taking a look at gender equality and diversity, health, safety or human rights, corruption, antitrust, other compliance risks? But make sure that they relate to the company, right? We work with a diverse group of organizations, and obviously we see more financial concerns in the financial organization. We see safety concerns in like oil and gas or manufacturing. So make sure that you're looking at what is really the greatest risk to your organization. And then what programs do you need to put in place to help mitigate these risks? What kind of trainings do you need to provide? Who do you need to involve across the organization? And then that goes to that senior level and cross-functional buy-in. Make sure you have that, right? Everything, Lisa, you mentioned this earlier, really comes from that top down. If the leadership is communicating it, and if the leadership has a voice and is talking it, then there becomes buy-in from the rest of the organization. So you have to have senior level buy-in initially before you start communicating it out. And then really take a look at your ethical culture. Do your employees trust it? Which is super important. If your employees, and again, this goes back to taking a look at other data that you're gathering, right? Not just from your ethics and compliance tools, but taking a look at what your employees are saying on Glassdoor. What are they saying in your engagement survey, for example? Do they trust you? Have you built an ethical, transparent culture? And if you sit back and you say, not really, you need to start there and make sure that you're doing it. And then understand what your employees need to hear to trust that you've built that ethical culture. It's a good question.
Yeah, great, thank you. And actually, while you were responding, a couple of good questions came in.
Great.
One is, what ESG metrics do you think tell a powerful ESG story? I could, I have there are innumerable number of metrics, and I think a lot of it has to do with what your goals and priorities are as a company. So first, it's important to set out what is your company strategy and how does ESG fit into the company strategy. That will determine what your goals are for the program. Once you determine what the goals are for the program, then you could define what the metrics are to make sure that you meet those goals and in what time frame. Some examples, though, I mean, just in terms of some ideas of metrics that jump out. In the E-space, I mentioned before, there are even just within facilities. So this is the team that manages your buildings and your office space. There are so many metrics there in terms of water use and power and electricity and paper goods and plastic and disposal and waste and efficient energy use and getting to net zero, there are so many metrics that are embedded in just the operations of your facilities, your offices, your office space, or your manufacturing plants. That's a great place to start and to just measure sort of how you're operating as a company in terms of the environment, and also in how you're developing the product. So there should be in the product development space lots of metrics around what goes into your products, how your products are being manufactured in terms of energy and waste and product and raw material, and where that raw material is coming from. And that goes downstream. So it's not just what you use as a company and how you operate, how you manufacture, but it's also your third parties. So gathering metrics around how your third parties are operating and what's in the products that they're providing to you, or the materials that they're providing to you. So there's it goes all the way downstream from an environmental perspective. On the S side, DEI is a place where there should be a lot of metrics and is, you get a big bang for your buck in terms of numbers, like hiring, promoting, salary. So there are a lot of metrics related to, and also the pipeline of candidates. So it's starting from the very beginning, where you're advertising, the diversity of avenues for getting the candidates. So there's a lot of data there. And then again, in terms of third parties, which suppliers are you using, and what metrics are you expecting from them in terms of what they're providing to you, and how they're operating, and who they're working with, and the elements of human traffic, and making sure that, so there's a whole process and a whole set of metrics that goes along with that. And then in the G space, what comes to mind is board diversity. So that's a low-hanging fruit where the NASDAQ and the SEC now approved the proposal to require a certain number of female directors and a certain number of directors who are from underprivileged communities and or LGBTQ. So and it's also state by state. So those are just some ideas. I mean, there's certainly not a comprehensive list, but just to answer I think a good question that came up. And I think there was a question about what's the best way to ensure ethics cases or hotline cases are investigated independently without conflicts of interest. And there's your company has to have a process for when reports are come in through the hotline, or in other ways, where you have a process, a protocol for how something gets investigated and who investigates it. So that's where the conflict of interest could be figured out. If it's about someone on the team of investigators, of course, you've got to find a non-partial party to be part of the investigation. And oftentimes it'll be about it could be someone in HR, and it's an HR issue that's coming in through the hotline. Well, the compliance team would take that, because somebody from HR can't investigate their own team. So you work it out through you're really important to have a protocol that defines how you come up with the investigation team, who investigates, who needs to know about the investigation, who's informed, who you investigate, etc. And that's where and of course, if the complaint is about somebody on the compliance team, there's typically a bypass process where if it's about the people who manage the hotline or who run the hotline, it bypasses them automatically, and it goes right to the general counsel or to the chief compliance officer, whoever it may be, to avoid that conflict.
Yep, that's a great point. We even have some customers of ours that have designated people outside the organization to handle everything as they come in, and then disperse that to the right people within the organization. So they see it first, right? Before then it goes to the rest of the team within the organization, and then help support them on those investigations. It's a really good question.
Great. Okay. Are there I don't see any other questions. Do you, Holly, Alyssa?
I don't. I'm looking through the list.
I think we have about 5 minutes left. So if anybody has any other questions, now would be the time. There's a couple questions here. I think Holly would be more for a follow-up email.
Yep, and we can easily do that. That's not a problem. Are there any additional questions? Or does everybody want their 5 minutes back?
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I think we're good.
No, me neither. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today. This was fun. And thank
Thanks for
you,
having
everyone, for attending and for your great questions. The few that are a little bit better for an email follow-up, I will make sure that I get that information to you. If you have any additional questions for me about what we do at Vault, feel free to reach out, or you can go to vaultplatform.com. It's my little commercial. Back to you, Florence.
Great. Thank you, Holly and Lisa, for that fireside chat. I think the best conversations and the best interactivity is when everyone in the audience gets to participate. So thank you for addressing a lot of those questions noted. I will say that in the next, we have a break coming up at